One of the most baffling seasons edit-wise is season 11 of RuPaul's Drag Race, and we're gonna get into that today. Typically, the story producers and the editing producers are on the same page when it comes to the final product of what we as the viewers experience from Drag Race, so that everything that happens on the ground makes sense in that final edit. So let me put a little pin in season 11, and we're gonna circle back to that in just a minute, because I wanna talk about a season that is a great example of this synergistic production and editing team dynamic. So let's talk season 5 for a minute. From the very start of the season, Roxy Andrews is pinned as being an endgame player. From her very first win over Lanesha in episode 1, a few bottom place dodges that she experiences throughout the season, despite underwhelming performances and completely justified reasons to put her there. And that's because her story is not supposed to wrap until the finale. Characters like Jinx Monsoon are constantly in placements that support the booger to Heather route. She places high in many episodes, but not quite being the bride until Snatch Game, where she gets her very first win and starts her inevitable incline in the competition. And that journey continues until the finale. Alaska and Detox's storyline, similar to Jinx's, supports them being endgame players. These placements make it easy for the final edit to go through, clean up some of their on-camera misses, add in some confessionals, and bam, they're frontrunners, both on the ground during filming as well as in the final edit. Characters like Alyssa and Coco are constantly making television, and their placements in the show are built in such a way that they can be placed within the edit as explosives in the workroom until their inevitable resolve in that final lip sync. Meanwhile, contestants like Jade, Lanesha, and Ivy Winters aren't really placed extraordinarily high or low. They're players that can be eliminated at any time in the competition, so that their storyline supports those endgame players. And Drag Race is a TV show at the end of the day, so the characters have to support the heroes and the villains that make it to the end of the story. The story producers appear to have a clear vision of what they wanted to do with that season. The judges' comments that we see support the narrative of each one of the roles identified. And we as the audience are left with zero dissonance in that final product on why certain players made it to the end over others. Season 5 is a great example of synergistic editing and ground production, because that clear focus of what was going on those producers' desks made it to the editing floor, so everything is even and matches up. Sometimes in Drag Race, it appears like they do not know what they're doing, and the editors cannot figure out how they're supposed to support the storyline, because some players are doing extraordinarily well in the beginning and are discarded like a toy that they just didn't want to play with anymore. And in order to make these stories stick, they have to edit the season a certain way. But in the case of season 11, which we're now going to go back to, we find that there is a very odd edit from what was actually happening in the endgame. And it appears that the ground story producers had no idea what they were doing with the season until about the midpoint. Unlike in other seasons where it is very apparent from the beginning who is going to go to the end just based off of who's collecting wins and who's doing well in the competition, who's placing high and who's placing low. And I genuinely believe that in season 11, the Sorry Not Sorry lip sync was the point where production team shattered and had to recollect all the pieces, and everything finally started to make sense. I do want to talk about the very clear and problematic editing of Mercedes. She was milked for an immigrant storyline, and then they had the gall to send her home to living in America during the Trump musical challenge, because she was very mistreated. Evie from the jump is treated like a shock out player, similar to someone like Ivy Winters, someone who does well all competition, has one falter moment and inevitably goes home, to an endgame player. Brooklyn Heights is given the very first win of the season, and her endgame trajectory doesn't really seem to change much throughout the game. Her trajectory is always clear and present on the ground and in the final edit. Akiria is an interesting one, because initially she comes off like they don't care about her. She comes off placement-wise almost like a Jade Jolie, someone with a bright personality who's just not going to make it that far in the competition. And she's criminally underlooked for the first half of the season. Even in her big first win, they seem to stop noticing her after that. And her placement in the design challenge is an odd one, because there were absolutely worse looks on the runway that week that should have been punished over what Akiria did. Silky from the start gets an endgame player role, even if that's a self-assigned one. But producers really lean in on that, and they give her an almost Roxy Andrews type role. Someone with a lot of personality who does well for the bulk of her run, dodges some very well-earned bottom placements in favor of others. Miss Vanjie comes off almost like a flux player, at least for the majority of the competition. Someone they can harshly critique for not doing drag the way that they want to see it, and pretty much always having a good reason to let her go if they wanted to. They treat her like she's going to be a mid-out, but holding on to her to see what happens, almost like they're hoping for a Coco storyline. And while they had a very clear dynamic in the workroom of someone that she had beef with, that they could have had a final lip sync with, they never pursue that storyline. And the editors force on us a Brangie storyline, which doesn't seem like it was that present in the workroom. Nina, for the very first half of the competition, seems almost like she's going to be in Alaska. She has big shoes to fill, but the judges aren't really sure if she can actually step into them and wear them confidently. Unfortunately, Nina becomes her biggest opponent in the competition, and she steps in her own way at any given opportunity. Suga's another interesting one in the bunch, because her run is pretty wretched, and the judges never seem to love what she does, but the editing room loves her. And they consistently give us a rug pulled out from underneath her type of edit. They show her favorably. They give her a lot of confessional time, and they misdirect us into thinking that she's going to do well, showing all of her high moments, only for the judges to very harshly critique her, both in the challenges and on the runway, and never give her flowers. She seems like someone who the editing team really liked, but what they do with her in that edit does not follow through with what's actually happening in the competition. Typically, if someone does bad in the challenges and does bad on the runway according to the judges, their edit will reflect that. We'll see them flubbing constantly. We get sloppy edits, we get the doofy one, but instead we get "this is the winner of the challenge" edit very consistently for Suga. Plastique, yet another interesting player in this game, because she initially seems like an endgame player, receiving an entire episode built almost exclusively for her, with Alyssa being there and receiving her win. It was like the story producers said, this is the finalist. Even RuPaul giving her the "I'm your new mommy" speech. RuPaul never has hugged anyone in the history of Drag Race. And it seemed that Plastique would be a top 3 player by sheer force of RuPaul loving her. Again, referring to the story producers that are on the ground, we know exist, seem to be prepping us for a very specific endgame where Silky, Brooke, Nina, and Plastique are the top 4. Silky being the antagonizer in the workroom, being the villain Roxy Andrews' character, Brooke being a frontrunner character, Nina being the almost Alaska character, and Plastique being that contestant that RuPaul just loves and is going to be very hard to eliminate her, with everyone else being pawns that they can remove as they need to. That seems to be the initial plan up until about the midway point of the season. And you can see that reflected with challenge win distribution. You can see that in the way that the girls are treated in those challenges, the roles they receive, the praise they receive on the runway. So by the time that we get to the Snatch Game Sorry Not Sorry lip sync, this is where everything, both on the ground and in the final edit, seemed to come into focus. Almost like a camera that has been trying to turn and twist to catch its image, but it's just been blurry until this point, and then it all comes into focus by that point. I believe with my whole heart that Evie was not on their radar for top 4. And I think a lot of people would agree with that statement. She had her single dual win that seemed more built for Scarlet, but Evie just happened to kill it as well. And that ball, which should have been Evie's chance to shine and really show what she can do, was a moment where she dropped the ball so hard that it seemed inevitable that she was going to go home. Like, imagine if Redacted from season 4 dropped that first challenge and did not succeed in RuPacalypse. I think that they would have discarded her as soon as they possibly could have, and set up Chad to be the winner. Plus, Evie was dealing with her injury, and similar to other queens who have been eliminated due to injuries on the show, it seemed like they were setting her up for that, preparing her to get the chop, and getting the chop from a very obvious top 4 contestant, Brooklyn Heights. But she turned out that lip sync in a way that RuPaul even seemed genuinely shocked and surprised about. Perhaps they were already planning a double save that season, but this double save seemed to be out of genuine shock from RuPaul, and there was just no way that she could be eliminated at that point. And from that moment, Evie became an endgame player and everybody else shifted in the competition. Plastique was a character that they did not want to play with anymore. Akira's star started to rise, and that top 4 placement started to shuffle around. Even Nina became less of a focus for them as someone to foster and grow because they had a new underdog character, someone who had big shoes to step in and actually did. Plus, Evie had a lot of friction in the workroom, which is a great storyline to focus on as you can show someone's growth through the competition. And this is the moment, I think, where they realized that she wasn't just there to do gender fuck and play around. She was there to compete. And, as mentioned, Akira comes out of almost left field to become a frontrunner. They praise everything she does. Even outfits like her surgery face kini, which in the past, where there have been excellent surgery looks that they ripped to shreds, they loved on Akira, despite it being one of the lowest of the surgery storylines we've seen on Drag Race. And she swings from safe placements to highs almost out of nowhere. From her original storyline in the first half of the season, Silky goes from dodging low placements to being unavoidably in the bottom. She comes off as a less likable character and more as an antagonizer. This is where they really lean into a Coco role for Vanjie. They're always let down by her, using her as a rook to snipe out pawns in the competition. She's never quite doing drag the way that they want to see it done, even though she wasn't doing that bad, because the editors don't show her flubbing to us. Nina and Plastique are jarringly cast off to the side and treated as if they should have been early outs in the competition, even though in the front half it seemed that they were slated for the end. And that's what makes this season so odd as an editing piece, because what we see does not support the actual story that's happening. And this is very rare for Drag Race. Those two pieces are very synergistic with each other. If someone does bad in a challenge, we get a lot of confessionals supporting that they did badly, so that we're not surprised when they lip sync. We are not surprised when someone is the winner because everyone in the workroom is talking about how good they did. The edit storyline focuses on that person who did well, so that we are primed and ready for them to win a challenge. And the edit in season 11 doesn't always do that. It's one of the oddest pieces of media that exists in the mainline Drag Race franchise. I think this is a fantastic season in its own way, but the story producers seemed extraneously confused in the moment on what they wanted to do with all these players and how they wanted to handle everyone, and suddenly shifted gears at the midpoint. And you can see that the editing team also struggled to keep up with what was going on and to keep everything in perspective for us as the viewers. Thank you so much for watching this little mini dissertation on season 11 of Drag Race. I will see y'all on the flip.